You're listening to Inner Guidance Channel.
The truth of any concept is known by the feeling which it inspires. I tell you that imagining creates reality, and ask you to imagine a certain state which would imply the fulfillment of your dream. Now, it doesn't really matter what another thinks or anyone thinks in this world, it's what you think. When you bring before your mind's eye a scene which implies the fulfillment of your dream, do you remain looking at it until you have that feeling of certainty which it should inspire? If it brings within you that feeling of certainty, what does it matter what another thinks? What then must you do? Now let me turn to the book of Habakkuk. The word means to embrace. If you're not familiar with it, it's a very short work. In this is said, "The Lord is of too pure eyes to behold the evil, the iniquity." And the prophet is asking these strange but important questions. Why? Why are you silent when the wicked swallows up the righteous? Why are you silent? Then said he, I will take my stand upon the watchtower, and I will watch to see and to hear what he will say unto me, and what I will answer. 2:1. Then comes the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord is this. First, write the vision upon tablets. Make it plain that he who runs may read it. And then comes the statement, for the vision has its own appointed hour. It ripens, it will flower. If it be long, then wait, for it is sure, and it will not be late. 2:3. There are those who try to rush everything into being, and will try to force it from conception to birth. They can't do it. But I will not stand here as a judge of anyone who has had an experience that I have not spoken of here, for there are many things in Scripture not recorded. As you're told in the end of John, they're just not recorded. And who am I to stand in judgment of anyone's picture? But I will say, knowing what I know from experience on this level, if you dare to assume that you are what you want to be, not knowing the interval of time between the assumption, this is now Habakkuk, which means the embrace. And the embrace is simply impregnation, as we brought out last Monday night when he covered, with his hand, he covered Moses. And the word meant copulation. So, who knows that interval of time? I know from the major things of Scripture, intervals of time. But between a simple thing like, I am wealthy, and its fulfillment, I do not know. I know that when I assumed that I was walking up the gangplank of a ship, and everyone told me I couldn't get out from the island of Barbados for at least, well, this was now in the month of March, and I couldn't get out until September, I walked up the gangplank, and in the act of walking up, I had that inner certainty. And I knew the truth of this statement, that the truth of any concept, I don't care what it is, comes when one has that feeling of inner certainty. Well, as I walked up, it seemed so natural, so real. Well, I hadn't even broken the spell before the phone rang offering me passage on a ship, and there were over 2,000 waiting to get a ship to take them north. I was singled out. I was at the bottom of the list. They gave me no reason why they singled me out with my wife and my daughter, but they did. That inner conviction. So I know that the truth of any concept, that was only a concept. So the truth of any concept is known by that feeling of a peculiar certainty. It's just, you know it, and I can't explain it other than you know that it's true. Now you can take this same thing through all the levels of being. So I say to everyone here, when you know what you want, you really know. That's a concept. All right, create a scene which would imply that you have it, that you are now living it, that you are now expressing it. Ask no one if you are entitled to it. And after you've done it, don't ask anyone if you did it. Only you know. If they should deny it, what does it matter what they say? It doesn't really matter. It's entirely up to you. You did it. It happened to you. And then wait to see it. For the vision has its own appointed hour. It ripens. It will flower. If it seems long, then wait, for it is sure, and it will not be late. That's the story. Now, when it comes to the overall picture of how God is awakening himself within man, let us go back to the book of Exodus. And here we are told that the time that it took the people of Israel to dwell in Egypt was 430 years. Exod 12:40. At the end of 430, on that very day, the whole host of the Lord departed from Egypt. It was a night of watching by the Lord, his night. Then we are told that Israel must now keep this night in memory. This night. It was 430 years. On that night, in one night, all departed, and it was a night of watching for the Lord. Now you read it and you wonder, what is it all about? Here Scripture is a mystery. Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of our religion. That is what we are told in Scripture when Paul writes his letter to Timothy. Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of our religion. 1 Timothy 16. Something mysterious in a way. And yet the word mystery is defined as a religious truth revealed by God that man cannot by reason alone discover. He cannot by reason discover it. It's revealed by God. Well, now this great indeed is the mystery of our religion means the doctrine of revealed truth. Here is a doctrine of revealed truth. 430 years. We're told in the 15th of Genesis, you will be enslaved, your descendants, for 400 years. After that, you will come out. 15, 13, 14. Then why 430 is given in the 12th of Exodus. Here the 15th of Genesis is 400, but in Exodus, when they begin to exit, is 430. Paul, when he speaks of it in Galatians, calls it 430, but it is first stated 400 years. Well, 400 years is the symbol of the cross. It's the 22nd letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the Tau, the cross. I wear this cross, and it's called 400 years. It doesn't mean 400 years in that sense. Then comes the first symbol. And as long as I am now in this world, I am enslaved. As I'm told, your descendants will be enslaved in a land that is not theirs. Then, at the end, you'll be brought out with great possessions. At the end. But now, the next book, Exodus, the 12th chapter, adds 30 years, so 30 years is added to the 400. And Jesus, when he began his ministry, was about 30 years of age. Luke 3:23. I remain in this world to play my part, and I'm being enslaved. The whole world is enslaved. Then comes that moment of the embrace, of the impregnation, and it takes 30 years from that moment to the birth of Christ, or the birth of the individual above, after my trials and tribulations in this world. So 400 years does not mean 400 as I have mentioned, years. The 30 does. The 400 represents the length. You can call it, as Blake calls it, 6,000 years. He also calls it 8,500 years. Call it what you will, where man is simply in this world where he is playing his part. He is playing it as he ought to play it, playing it beautifully. Then comes that moment in time when he is elected, he is called, and he's embraced. Now, stand upon your watch and watch it from this moment on, for it has its own appointed time. Benny called me today. After all, Benny was only 30 when it happened to him, so he could not have known the embrace. But there are others who are not aware of the moment of the embrace. So watch for it. In my own case, I was old enough to know it. It was 1929, and I am fully aware of that moment of the embrace. Then came 1959 when it happened. So I can say to anyone from my own experience, this is how it happens. If you don't know when, then I can't tell you. I can't measure the 30 years if you didn't know when it began. But after it happens, I will then actually state for you when these things will happen. Now, in this world of Caesar, the same law holds true. It's a reflection all the way down in the shadow world. I do not know how late or how long it takes, say, a little budgie to hatch out. A friend of mine is now breeding them, and he called today to say he has 3. Well, there were 7 eggs the last time I saw them. and in a week only 3 came out. When each one started, he doesn't know. So it's just like this. I do not know if I now assume that I am wealthy. What is the interval between my assumption that I am wealthy to the point where I actually reach that conviction? I must have the feeling of a peculiar conviction that it's true. When I have it, that is impregnation. I have a conception. The conception is the egg. Now, how true is it? How real is it? Well, now, based entirely on my inner conviction that it's done, if I can assume that I am now the man that I really want to be, and know when I did it, I can time it from then on. Because if that is how it happened concerning wealth, it should always happen this way. If it's that concerning something else, it always happens that way. So that a horse has a year, a cow 9 months before it hatches out. A man has 9 months, a sheep 5 months, a chicken 3 weeks. So there are intervals of time. Another one comes, and in this story she's exhausted. I won't go back in all the details that precede it. She's exhausted. She spent the day in she worked on her husband's books and brought all the books up to date. And it was now 1 a.m. She's tired, but at 1 a.m. the house isn't clean. The chores of the day were neglected, and she couldn't go to bed unless they were all done, like the dishes, the pots and pans, and all the things. Well, she's exhausted. She has no energy left, and she starts to clean them and wash the dishes, and she's in tears from sheer physical exhaustion. He comes and sees her in tears and pitches in to help. When she went to bed, she felt, well, what can I do? I can't take an individual episode. I can only say I want something exactly opposite to all these problems. She simply imagined a scene that was extremely opposite to all these problems of the day. And she actually could see in the darkness of the room, she saw the whole thing begin to unfold objectively before her mental activity is taking place. And out of the nowhere, here comes this fantastic, enormous scene. Mountains, trees, a huge, huge scene. And she notices that every change in her mental activity produces a change in this external scene. A tree away in the back comes forward to the right, and the mountain that was in the back comes forward, and the whole thing is adjusting to her mental activity, the whole vast world, and she did not know a thing about that. It's adjusting as she adjusts her mental activity. It's adjusting to it. And she came to the conclusion that my God is a God of activity, a God of action. For the whole vast thing is unfolding within her. Everything that she imagines is taking place with her own being. She said, I actually felt the whole vast world was moving in me, like beings moving up and down on parade. There is, I think it's the 8th Zohar, where Blake mentions it. I think it is, but I do know it is in the Zohars that he mentions that moving within you, and the whole thing adjusting itself to what he is seeing on the outside. So that's how God sees us. We are adjusting to his perfect Eden, and when we by our own mental activity produce the changes in Eden, and they superimpose, there you are. You've done it. So the whole thing took place within her. As she's looking out, the whole thing's unfolding within her. I ask you to try it. Take the most fantastic thing in this world. If I tell you tonight that, well, I don't know whether you have had it or not, don't for one moment, just because I do not know, stop there. If you have that inner conviction, for the truth of any concept is known by the feeling of certainty which that conviction inspires. So if it doesn't inspire that conviction, well then, you haven't had it. If, on the other hand, it inspires that conviction, don't ask me to confirm it, because should I say I don't think so, what would it matter? It would be nothing to you if I am not with you on it. So do not be disillusioned if I am not with you, because it has not been my experience. So you take it from there, and then go forward and trust this inner feeling. Because on this level it works. Well, if it works on this level, it will work in the depths of your own being. If I could climb a gangplank that is not visible, and while I'm climbing it, feeling that I'm actually doing it and watching all the things, and then put my hand on the rail and look with nostalgia towards the island that I'm leaving and the family that I'm leaving behind. And yet it's a peculiar feeling. I'm leaving them and I'm sad, and yet I'm happy in the going. I want to get back to my apartment in New York City, and therefore I've got to leave them. So there's a peculiar bittersweet in this feeling. I feel it so naturally. And suddenly the phone is ringing and the call is coming. I'm taking the next boat to get back just in time. So here I know from experience there is an actual time interval. That happened just like this, but I can tell you how to duplicate it. I only know what I did. I arrived at the point of the feeling of a peculiar certainty. And that certainty was inspired, it was a peculiar inspiration, and it worked that way. I've had it not only for myself, but others time and time and time again. So you have a concept. The concept, is it true? Well, you can tell the truth of the concept by this technique. You can always tell the truth of a concept by that feeling of certainty which it inspires. So, when I imagine that I am seeing the world as I would see it, were it as I desire it to be, so that I'm inspired, it's real, it's true, well then, it doesn't really matter what another thinks. What does it matter what he thinks or they think? I tell you, it will work that way. It will not fail you. So in this series, on the series of which I'm trying constantly to tell you which is the real thing. For if you just tonight owned the world, you saw the headlines and heard the headlines and this constant confusion tonight about gold, so what? But if tonight you wanted, I don't care what it is, and the concept, you can contemplate it, and so contemplate it that it seems to be real, so natural, that it awakens within you that feeling of certainty it's real. Well, no power in this world can stop it. It can't stop it. If you look out for confirmation from others, then you're not doing it. Don't ask anyone if what you did is right or wrong. Did you do it? That's all. I tell you, this is true. When it comes now to the story of Scripture, I would go all out in defending my own personal observation of what happened to me. And so when I said to Benny the 6th, and he wrote me his letter, brought it up last night, I was in bed, but he stuck it in the door. This morning when I went out to get my morning paper, here is Benny's letter, and he confirmed it in his letter. Now let me tell you his letter. He said, I was invited by a couple, man and wife. They are Negroes. They invited me to a party. I joined them, and we went off towards the party. On the way, they said, let us stop home, meaning their home. And so we stopped at their home. There was a little party of Caucasians in their teens having fun in their home, all Caucasians. The two who invited me were Negroes. They left the room, the living room, where the party was taking place. I'm enjoying the kids. They're all young people having fun. They quickly returned with their hats and their coats in their hands and announced to me in a very authoritative and indifferent manner, you stay and take care and mind the children. Well, it struck me funnily that they would do that to me, invite me to a party. They are going on now to the party, and I am left to take care of the children. The children were very sweet and lovely, but I wondered, I don't have to stay here. Out of the nowhere comes this blonde, blue-eyed, fair-skinned lad among these Caucasians, and I know he's David. David looks me in the eye, and David said to me, I know that our Father will never leave us. I knew, here is my son. This is my David, my son, and he knew I am his father. But I also felt I was a part of all of them. I felt that love for all of them. I was the father of David, but I also was the father of all of them. Now this was on Wednesday of last week. On Friday, he said, I was telling some friends of mine how I met, in this wonderful experience of vision, David of biblical fame, and David called me father. and I knew he was my son, and I knew I was his father. Here I'm telling the story, and all of a sudden I am waking, and I'm on my bed. It was a dream. The doubling of a dream is the confirmation as told us in the 41st of Genesis. Here, he thought he was fully awake talking to these friends of his, that David of the Bible is his son, and he's telling them and calling him David, 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 and suddenly he begins to awake and realizes it was a dream. So here is the story. I tell you, you cannot violate it. It's right in Scripture as he is described in the 16th chapter of 1 Samuel, and you will not change his description no matter who you are. He is described there. The Christ child is not described. That Christ child could be anything. It could be black, pink, white, yellow. It could be anything. But David is described. Jesus is not described in Scripture. There is no description of him in Scripture, none. But I'll tell you who he is if you read Daniel and Revelation. That is the closest description to the Ancient of Days. And when you see David, he is simply the youth of the Ancient One. And you, what David sees is the Ancient One. Benny, who to us wears a very dark skin, in the eyes of his son David was that Ancient One, which, may I tell you, is fair of skin, blonde and blue-eyed. And that's Benny. He is wearing a mask, as we are all wearing masks. We're all wearing masks. And Benny, in the eyes of his son David, was that Ancient of Days. That's the only one that David could see. And he's fair as they come, and Benny is as dark as they come. Here, Benny in the eyes of his son is that one, the Ancient of Days, the risen Lord. That's Benny. Now I'm telling him, I'm going out on a limb, the 8th of July. That's when you'll be split in two from top to bottom, and you'll have it just as you had it. He said to me, you know, I despaired when you told me that. I was a little bit nervous that you would go out on a limb publicly and state such a statement. And here out of the nowhere it happened, because the vision has its own appointed hour. It ripens, it will flower. If it be long wait, it is sure, and it will not be late. Now here in Ezekiel opens up the book. In the 30th year, the heavens opened, and I saw visions of God. Verse 1. And as I looked, behold, a stormy wind. Verse 4. That's how it opens. It gives you a month and a day meaning nothing. He's giving you the year. In the 30th year is how the whole book begins. In the 30th year, he is telling you, the heavens opened, and I saw visions of God. And as I looked, behold, a stormy wind. That's exactly what happens. You can't describe this unearthly wind that comes in the 30th year, and in that 30th year you are born from above. So we are told in Scripture that we are born through what? The resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. On Petwadra 1:3. Well, Jesus Christ is the pattern man in every man. You couldn't live were it not that Jesus Christ was in you. Unless I die, thou canst not live. His actual death in the most literal sense took place that you may live, I may live. So God died, but really in the true sense of the word, his death is my life. Now he has to rise. As he rises only when he impregnates himself, because the one sent and the sender are one. Now he so loves the one that he sent, he impregnates him in me. He embraces me, and as he embraces me, then count 30 years, and my mission will start 30 years later. So in 30 years after he impregnates me, that's the gestation period of God. After my 400, which is not 400, but thousands of years of wandering in the wilderness, this world. Tonight, what confusion in the world. What horrible confusion when they're threatening the whole vast collapse of the Western economy. That's confusion. That's a horrible concept. But in spite of it, the individual, when he's called and embraced, what does it matter what he has to go through from that moment to the time when he's awake, when he's born? So he's born into an entirely different age. He's taken out of one age into a new age. But you who come here and you know this law, it doesn't really matter what the headline said tonight. You know the principle, and the principle is imagining creates reality. And you'll take a concept, and don't try to feel that you are better than someone else. You're the creative power. Forget what's happened to you or what they're talking about. Well then, can you stand upon your watch and watch to see what he will say and how I will answer him? Well, that's the world. Read it in the 2nd chapter of Habakkuk. So I will stand upon my watch and assume that I am the man that I want to be. Now, let's see if I'm actually seeing what I ought to see if my assumption is real. I should see exactly what should reflect this assumption. Now, do I see it to the point of feeling that certainty that inspires me so that I know it's true? If I can reach that point of satisfaction, then it's true. Let the whole vast world collapse, and that will come true. No power in the world can stop it. Gold or silver or anything else goes through the window. It doesn't really matter. So I say to anyone, if you have visions that I have not had, and you're told in the 21st chapter of John, if all things were told, the world would not contain the books. Therefore, do not think, because I have not had your experience, that it is not true. And do not try to force me into accepting the fact that what you tell me is what you tell me it is. I'd say, all right, do you have the inner conviction? Well then, go your way. It is right. I'm only following Scripture. My pattern has been a complete scriptural pattern, from the embrace, the birth, the resurrection, the empty tomb, the 3 who witnessed the birth. Everything of Scripture I followed faithfully. There's no deviation in my pattern. But I'm not saying because it has happened this way to me that it is the only way. So let everyone have their experience. But follow along this line when it comes to the picture that you can be the man that you want to be. I know that you can. But you don't do it by simply wishing. Can you bring about that inner conviction? You can. Stand still. Look at the world mentally and see it reflect you, as it would have to see you were you now what you want to be. Then seeing it, remain in that state until there is that conviction that inspires you to explode and you feel thrilled it's all done. Well then, do nothing. What do you do after pregnancy? You do nothing. You simply wait, for it all has its own appointed hour. So I can't tell you what to do to help. Wait. And if you actually know that you conceived at that moment, and the egg is a fertile egg, well then, wait. In a way that we do not understand when you least expect it, that projects itself in the world, and you enjoy, whether it be health, wealth, position, anything in this world. That's how it works. So you take what I've told you this night and treat it seriously. It will not fail you, but you are the operant power. It doesn't operate itself. So if I have appeared to treat lightly, and I didn't intend that, any vision or dream, then forgive me. I did not intend that. I only know that the story of Scripture is true from beginning to end. And in my own case, it has followed Scripture so literally. But I would not go out and say that because it's not in Scripture. Scripture tells us that not everything that happened in the life of Jesus Christ, which is the pattern man, is recorded. For if all were recorded, the world would not be big enough to hold all the books, as we're told in the 21st chapter of John. But do not try to force me to admit something that I cannot. Those who have had it, I ask you to believe it. It will happen this way. Now, to the one who had this experience the other night, I can tell her. And she wrote me a letter, a lovely letter which I got today, thank you. I know your reaction of impatience to bring it to birth right away. But you can't bring it to birth right away. But what is 30 years in this fabulous eternity? It seems short, really. It's so short to wait the simple little interval of time. When you're awake, mind you, and moving forward, you do not lose your memory. Should you depart tonight, you'd find yourself a young lady, 20. And what is 30 years? That's at the age of 50. To find yourself bringing into this world the Christ child rising from within yourself. Then a few, 3.5 years, the completed pattern. And then you enter a new age, which is the world of eternity. You depart from death and enter life. You move from darkness to light. But your reaction was natural, may I tell you, perfectly natural. And I told my friend who called me up, because she was terribly concerned after your reaction, and reminded me of this story that I had in New York City. This young girl comes rushing into the subway. Of course, in New York City, as you know, no one gets up for anything. It's your seat, and you open up your paper without concern for anyone else. And she comes rushing into the subway and she says, "Would you please let a pregnant lady have a seat?" A gentleman jumps right up and he's very concerned and he wonders, well, now when is this lady expecting? She says, "I do not know. I've just had the impression." She didn't know. I'll tell this lady, she knows now it's 30 years. 30 years. But what's 30 years for such a joy? You've been selected, you've been chosen, and you're one of the elect. Now let us go into the silence. For instance, I could tell you that you are now what you want to be, but I may not persuade you. As Blake said in his discussion with Isaiah, he asked Isaiah if a firm persuasion that thing is so, makes it so, and Isaiah replied, all poets believed that it did, and in ages of imagination, a firm persuasion removed mountains. But not many are capable of a firm persuasion of anything. Memorable fancy. If one could actually become persuaded, they could remove mountains, he said. Now, I can imagine that I am, first of all, I must assume that I am what would conjure, what would reflect and bear witness to the fact that I am what I am assuming that I am. We start with an assumption. I assume that I am, and you name it. Well then, mentally you see your world which should reflect your assumption. Mentally you see it. Now remain there until you are self-persuaded, so that you actually feel the thrill of the reality of what you're seeing, so that when the spell is broken, you don't forget what you saw. That is what you are. Now it has its own appointed hour, and it will flower, and eventually it will come into your world. So remain faithful to what you've just seen. You feel the thrill of what you've seen. Is that clear? It will not fail you, but it won't work itself. You have to operate it. Good night.